Okay, so what we're doing today is we're looking at One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest for a little while, and then we're going to go back to the clips from Hunger Games, and it's actually a matching clip from Catching Fire. Both will work for the writing activity. But let's take a look at the board. All the way in the left-hand side of the board, we see Ken Kesey's goals for this novel. The first thing you need to know is that this is a stream of consciousness novel, very typical of mid-1950s era writers who are writing in that postmodern style. They're taking the whole 1920s make it new thing from Ezra Pound, and they're making it weirder and more different. And in Ken Kesey's case, he takes a main character, our narrator, who doesn't see the world in a straightforward way. The guy's been institutionalized for like 30 years, and he's pretending to be a deaf mute. So Ken Kesey has his main character as a half Native American fake deaf mute. And what you learn about in the novel is that he's pretending to be a deaf mute because Kesey is using him as a symbol for how Native Americans are an underserved population, that they are ignored. All right? There's a number of scenes in the book where Bromden sees himself as small. And he meets McMurphy, who is the Jack Nicholson character, and McMurphy's like, dude, you're huge! And Bromden's like, I don't understand what you're talking about, I'm tiny. I don't know why you see that. Because in his mind, he's small because he's socially insignificant. All right? So here's what's really cool. By using Chief Bromden as our narrator, Ken Kesey is able to talk about all these big metaphorical and social issues. The seeming insignificance of Native Americans, the way psychiatric patients are treated. He does all these things through Chief Bromden telling us stuff. So everything Chief Bromden says is not real, but it's still metaphorically accurate. I think I told you guys this already, but when Ken Kesey wrote the screenplay for the unbelievably award-winning film, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he was so mad at the changes they made that he refused to see the movie. Have you guys seen this movie? It's unbelievable. It's different enough from the book that I think watching the movie will actually ruin your paper. If I thought that, like when you read A Raisin in the Sun and you saw the movie, the play of A Raisin in the Sun, it's an even match, almost verbatim. But the whole premise of the film is that McMurphy is our main character and Chief Bromden is sidelined, which is quite literally the opposite of Ken Kesey's intentions. So I think watching the movie is great, and you should watch the movie. But watching the movie instead of reading the book will make for a bad paper. I've seen people do it. It really doesn't work. So these are Ken Kesey's goals, to show us a stream of consciousness postmodern text so we can get into Bromden's mind. He wants to increase our awareness of Native American needs and increase the awareness of what goes on in psychiatric hospitals in the 1950s. He worked at a hospital in upstate New York. He saw and experienced the LSD tests that the government was doing at the time. And so he's talking from a position of knowledge in this fiction. From page 1, your book is page 3, there is racism, right? Our narrator talks about the orderlies, he calls them black boys. Throughout the whole book, he calls them worse sometimes as well. And in response, they call him Chief Broom. Turns out his father was, in fact, the chief of his tribe. But they're calling him Chief Broom because all he does is sweep the floors. So they are being condescending and cruel, and he is being condescending and cruel as well, right? Everybody's racist in this book. I don't think Ken Kesey is saying, racism's great. I think he's saying, this is how real people talk, and it's not very nice, all right? The fact that on page 24, we learn about how he's half Native American, and we learn that he sees himself as very, very small. Turn to page 24. Highlight this in the book if you think we're leaning towards something that might be interesting for you in your paper. The line in the novel actually let's start at the bottom of 23. I remember all this part real clear. I remember the way he closed one eye and tipped his head back and looked down across that healing wine-colored scar on his nose, laughing at me. I thought at first he was laughing because of how funny it looked, an Indian's face and black, oily Indian's hair on somebody like me. I thought maybe he was laughing at how weak I looked. But that's when I remember thinking that he was laughing because he wasn't fooled for 1 minute by my deaf and dumb act. It didn't make any difference how cagey the act was. He was on to me and was laughing and winking to let me know it. So either he sees McMurphy as on his side, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, I get what you're doing here, guy, or he's mocking him. Bromden holds back on his opinion of McMurphy for a little while, but it's pretty clear from the start of the novel that he is completely captivated by him, by his energy, by his vitality, by the way he talks trash to the nurses and the orderlies, the way he seems brave compared to everybody else's weaknesses. What's your story, Big Chief? You look like Sitting Bull on a sit-down strike. What's your name, Chief? His name is Bromden, Chief Bromden. Everyone calls him Chief Broom, though, because the aides have him sweeping a large part of the time. There's not much else he can do, I guess. He's deaf. If I was deaf, I would kill myself. Highlight that line, please. If I was deaf, I would kill myself. And the reason I want you to highlight, there's a couple different reasons why I want you to highlight it. Because death seems to be right around the corner in one form or another through the entire book. But I also think that one of the ways the men in this novel feel better about themselves is by finding someone else on the ward who's in a shittier position, excuse my French, in a worse position than they are. Billy Bibbit is in this prison, he's in this ward, which seems like a prison. He doesn't want to be there. The nurse knows his mom and guilts him into staying every time he thinks about leaving. And in order for it to make himself feel better, he puts down somebody else. They all do that. So this is a great example of the social structure of this hospital ward. You could write a really tremendous paper about the social structure of the ward. And Randall P. McMurphy is at the top of the patients, and Nurse Ratchet is at the top of the people who work there. The doctor does what she tells him to, even though theoretically he should be more in charge. The orderlies do what she tells them to, and most of the patients do what she tells them to. In the end, one of the biggest challenges in this novel is McMurphy versus Nurse Ratchet. So you could write a whole paper looking at how these two vie for attention, and think about who wins, because it's not a simple answer. So that would work really well as a paper topic. But in order to prove that, you have to show their strengths and weaknesses throughout the novel, so keep an eye on that. In fact, if you're interested in that as a paper topic, on the inside cover of your book, write McMurphy versus Nurse, ? And that'll remind you to highlight passages that reinforce that. Another really great paper topic is just to focus on Chief Bromden. How Ken Kesey's use of stream of consciousness teaches us about the story. There's a line on page 8. Everyone turn to page 8. Chief Bromden, our narrator, says, "It's the truth, even if it didn't happen." And for me, if I was going to write a paper on this, and I'm not saying you should do this, this is just something that I found most interesting about the book, that idea that it's the truth even if it didn't happen is a fascinating concept to me. Because it turns out that Chief Bromden's truths are metaphorically accurate. Please look at page, let's see, that scene where she grows, page 4 maybe it is. Yeah, on the bottom of page 4. Then she cites those black boys. They're still down there together, mumbling to one another. They didn't hear her come on the ward. They sense she's glaring at them now, but it's too late. They should have known better to group up and mumble together when she was due on the ward. Their faces bob apart, confused. She goes into a crouch and advances on where they're trapped in a huddle at the end of the corridor.